What I would say is I'm glad to see the Chinese senior policymakers talking about a lack of demand in the economy, about the need to support growth in the economy, especially from domestic demand. I don't know that I've seen anything concrete yet that I think would really answer the mail on that, but I think it's an important step that they are acknowledging that domestic demand needs to go faster and that they need to support their growth with consumption and with domestic demand. I think, when as you mentioned, we were there for what we call the Economic Working Group. I led a kind of senior delegation of Treasury officials there to talk to senior Chinese policymakers. And one of the key points we raised with them is that their savings rate is really high. That leads to this huge kind of imbalance in their economy unless they can drive some sort of demand for it. And otherwise, what they've been doing is channeling that savings towards subsidies to manufacturing industry, producing a lot that they don't have domestic demand for. And that's what I'd like to see more of. And I think it's a good start to see them talk about it. I think we need to see more concrete policies.
Did you sense, sir, that your counterparts are understanding of those concerns and maybe thinking about wider behavioral changes in that regard? What was the reception like when you raised these things?
So this is something we've been talking to the Chinese about for quite a while. I'd say that in one of our trips in February, we really pushed the point quite hard. And then when Secretary Yellen was there in April of this year, she really tried to lay out the case for why this was a problem for both the world economy and really why it was a problem for the Chinese economy. You don't want to subsidize a lot of firms that are losing money. It's inefficient. It's a waste of fiscal resources. It's also just low productivity for your economy. So one of our advantages, frankly, at Treasury right now is we have a world-renowned economist leading Treasury. And so people take her seriously when she's there, and they really do want to listen to her. From a political perspective, they certainly push back on the narrative of overcapacity. But I think what we're seeing on the policy grounds are steps, hopefully, that will lead to ones in the right direction.
Well, to your point, sir, on Secretary Yellen, do you expect we will see another meeting between her and He Lifeng before this administration is over?
I'm not sure. I think both sides view this channel as a really important one. And that's one reason I was just there, was to make sure that we could keep robust engagement. We've always said it's not tenable to have the two largest world economies not talk to each other. And one thing the Secretary has often said is we need to talk about the things we agree about and where we can work together. But it's equally as important, if not more so, to talk about the things where we don't agree. And so we try to go and do both.
Cooperation and competition, if you will, sir. I do wonder, especially given some of the rhetoric we're seeing on the campaign trail from Donald Trump, which I won't ask you to comment directly on, but he, of course, is talking about implementing higher tariffs on Chinese exports. Do you see tariffs as a mechanism to address some of these overcapacity concerns, essentially raise the cost of some of these goods that are being made so that people don't want to import them and that supply doesn't actually hit foreign markets? What is the proper role of trade-specific measures here?
So we have used trade tools already. I think narrowly targeted and strategic trade measures can sometimes try to either shift the calculus for a specific product or, for that matter, maybe change the other country's strategy a little bit. So I think narrowly targeted strategic tariffs can be a useful tool. One of the reasons we've been trying to have this conversation with China is to make clear that it won't just be the U.S. doing this. You'll see this happening from a lot of countries, and that if they do start to see, whether it's tariffs or other trade measures, they shouldn't think of it as us attacking China or us being against China. They should recognize that this is really defensive on our part, and China in some sense has agency here. They can change their own policies in ways that would not lead to the rest of the world putting tariffs on their goods.
Of course, sir, while the U.S.'s focus is on its own relationship with China, there is concern as well about China's relationship with other countries, including adversaries like Russia. We, of course, saw Secretary Yellen earlier this year warning about companies providing material support, Chinese companies, that is, to Russia's war, whether it's through banking or other goods, that if they are providing the support, they risk being sanctioned by the U.S. Have you started to see behavioral changes on the parts of Chinese banks or other companies when it comes to dealing with Russia?
So this is a topic that we talk about a lot with our counterparts. They recognize this is something that is a serious strategic interest of ours. And so China has said many times that they have no intention of allowing lethal aid to go to Russia. Where we've been really pressing them is on dual-use goods that could be used by Russia to kind of build up their war machine. What we've made clear is that if financial firms are processing transactions towards sanctioned entities or with these dual-use goods, they're exposed to sanctions. Large Chinese banks understand that connectivity to the U.S. financial system and the global financial system is essential for them, and so neither those firms nor their regulators want them to do anything that runs afoul of our sanctions. So a lot of this is doing the hard work of making clear what really would expose you to risk and what wouldn't, what exactly we're trying to get firms not to do. Sometimes that can lead to where we've had to sanction a firm, not financial firms so far, but we have had to sanction a few Chinese firms because we felt that they were crossing lines. And what we try to do through dialogue is, in some sense, stop the behavior before it ever happens and before we have to take sanctions.
And finally, sir, in our last minutes with you here, I'd like to ask you kind of a wider question. It does relate to Russian behavior as well. The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and one of the great breadbaskets of the world, a hot war in the Middle East as well, where, of course, a lot of energy is centered. How concerned are you when you look at the global economic outlook and some of these risks that are present about things that could refuel inflation, for example, or otherwise be disruptive to a global economy and a U.S. economy, frankly, that to this point has been able to hold in there, even as we've seen inflationary pressures come down?
Look, I'm an economist by training, and so I worry about everything. But that being said, I think what we know is that geostrategic risks or geopolitical risks are always out there. What we try to do is minimize any potential impact on the U.S. economy. As you noted, I think we've seen a really strong U.S. economy. I think it was a Bloomberg poll maybe a year and change ago where 100% of the people polled thought we'd have a recession in 23. We didn't. We got through the year with actually quite strong growth, and we've managed to see inflation come down while the unemployment rate has stayed at a fairly historically low level. That's despite a lot of challenges around the globe. We're obviously doing everything we can at Treasury and across the U.S. government to minimize any of those challenges, to prevent disruptions to energy markets or food markets or things like that that could damage the world economy and really blow back on U.S. consumers. So we think about it all the time, we worry about it all the time, but we are hopefully taking the steps that would prevent those shocks from really reverberating here.